How long would you wait before calling the police if someone you loved walked out the door one morning and never came home? A few hours, perhaps? A day? Maybe two? It's a question that sits uncomfortably in the mind. One that depends on countless factors we rarely consider until we're forced to confront them. If the missing person is an adult, independent and capable, you might convince yourself they simply forgot to call. Perhaps they're staying at a friend's place. Perhaps their phone died. You tell yourself to wait until morning, that the panic tightening in your chest is premature, that everything will be fine when the sun rises again. But what happens when morning comes and they're still gone? What happens when the silence stretches from hours into days, and the reassurances you whispered to yourself in the darkness begin to sound hollow in the daylight? This is the story of a young woman who stepped into a stranger's car on an ordinary summer morning and vanished into a mystery that would expose the dangerous intersection between digital connection and human vulnerability. It's a story that asks uncomfortable questions about trust, about the hidden lives people lead online, and about the moments when everything we think we know about someone unravels into something darker than we could have imagined. If you find yourself drawn to the hidden mysteries that unfold across Asia, to the stories that linger in the shadows of everyday life, make sure to subscribe to this channel. There are so many more waiting to be uncovered, each one a window into the enigmatic corners of this vast continent. This particular mystery begins in June of 2022, in Japan, where a 23-year-old woman named Irina Arano lived what appeared to be an unremarkable life. On the morning of June 5th, Irina told her mother she was meeting a friend. It was a casual announcement, the kind that happens in households everywhere, carrying no weight of premonition. Her mother, like mothers do, probably nodded, perhaps reminded her to be careful, to call if she'd be late. The door closed. Irina stepped out into the brightness of early summer, and she never walked back through that door again. As night fell that evening, Irina's family felt the first stirrings of worry. They called her phone once, twice, again and again, and each time the call went unanswered, tumbling into voicemail. But Irina was an adult, fiercely independent, someone who had lived on her own before returning to her family home. She was 23 years old enough to make her own decisions, to change her plans without checking in. So her family waited, telling themselves she would return, that there was a reasonable explanation they simply hadn't thought of yet. Hours became one day became two. By the third day, when there had been no word from Irina, no message, no phone call, no sign that she was safe somewhere in the world, her family's worry had crystallized into something harder, more urgent. They could no longer convince themselves that everything was fine. They went to the police and filed a missing person report. The family explained to the officers that Irina had a habit of going out for extended periods, of being somewhat unreachable for a few hours at a time. She valued her independence, her privacy, but she had never disappeared like this. This silence was different, heavier, wrong. The police, recognizing that this behavior was uncharacteristic enough to warrant immediate attention, began their investigation without delay. They started where all modern investigations begin now, in the digital footprints we leave behind without thinking. They pulled security camera footage from train stations and streets along the routes Irina typically traveled, scanning through hours of recordings, searching for any glimpse of her. And then they found it. A security camera positioned near a train station close to Irina's home had captured something crucial. The footage showed Irina approaching a car, then getting inside with a man nobody in her family recognized. The vehicle's license plate was clearly visible in the recording, a detail that would prove pivotal. When the police traced the registration, they discovered the car belonged to a 33-year-old man named Hiroyuki Sununpei, who lived in a nearby district. The police went to his address. After all, he appeared to be the last person to see Irina before she vanished into thin air. When the officers knocked on Hiroyuki's door, he was, by all accounts, surprisingly cooperative. He didn't seem evasive or nervous. He admitted readily that he knew Irina, that they had met through social media, and that yes, they had arranged to meet on June 5th. But, he insisted, he had nothing to do with her disappearance. According to Hiroyuki's account, they had spent a few hours together that day, and then he had dropped her off near a convenience store. That was the last time he saw her. His story was straightforward, delivered without apparent guilt or hesitation. But something about it didn't sit right with the investigating officers. There was a wrongness to it they couldn't quite articulate, an instinct born from years of listening to people explain away their involvement in things they claimed to know nothing about. The officers made a decision. They would split into two teams. One would conduct a thorough search of Hiroyuki's residence. The other would examine his phone, looking through his messages with Irina, his photos, his digital trail. In both places, they discovered things that transformed their unease into alarm. The team searching the house moved through the rooms methodically. Everything appeared ordinary at first. The home looked lived in, but not suspicious. Nothing that screamed of violence or concealment. It was just a house, until they found the door to the basement. When they descended those stairs, they expected to find what basements typically contain. Boxes of old belongings, furniture awaiting disposal, the accumulated debris of everyday life. Instead, they found something that stopped them cold. In the center of the room stood a bed, clearly in recent use. At the headboard, a pair of handcuffs was attached. The mattress itself was heavily soiled with bodily fluids. Not blood from what investigators could determine, but sweat and other secretions that suggested intense physical activity had taken place there. Meanwhile, the other team was making discoveries of their own in Hiroyuki's phone. They wanted to see what he and Irina had discussed, whether there was anything in their messages that might be incriminating, anything that would contradict his claim of innocence. What they found in his camera roll was more disturbing than they had anticipated. There were multiple videos and photographs showing a woman who appeared to be Irina, handcuffed to that bed in the basement, participating in what could only be described as extreme acts. The exact content of these videos was never publicly disclosed, but every news report that covered the case described at least one of the videos as explicit, somewhat violent, and clearly homemade. The investigators looked at the evidence before them, the fluids on the mattress in the basement, the woman who looked like Irina suffering in the images on the phone, and believed they had their answer. This seemed like a clear case. He must have abducted Irina, abused her in that basement, and now all that remained was discovering what he had done with her afterward. But even confronted with these discoveries, Hiroyuki maintained his story. He looked at the officers and said calmly that he hadn't kidnapped anyone. He and Irina knew each other. They had arranged to meet. And then he offered a piece of information that shocked both the investigators and Irina's family. Everything that had happened in his house, Hiroyuki claimed, had been consensual. Irina, he revealed, was an adult content creator, and they had agreed to film those scenes together. It was business, he implied. It was work. They had made an arrangement, and she had been a willing participant. Now the investigation faced a more complex question. Was Hiroyuki telling the truth? And more importantly, where was Irina? To understand how these two people came to be connected, how a chance encounter on social media led to this dark basement, and an investigation into disappearance, we need to look back at who they were before their paths crossed. Irina Arano had been born and raised in Japan, the daughter of parents who worked ordinary jobs and led quiet lives. She grew up like many young people in modern Japan, navigating the pressures of education and social expectation, trying to figure out who she was and what she wanted from life. At some point during her late teenage years or early 20s, Irina made a decision that she kept private from her family. She began creating adult content, selling access to intimate photos and videos online. It's work that exists in a gray space in many societies, legal but stigmatized, lucrative for some but dangerous in ways that aren't always immediately apparent. Irina approached this work independently. She had no agent, no production company protecting her or vetting her clients. She maintained her own social media presence, negotiated her own deals, and met with people who contacted her through various platforms. For a while, she had lived on her own, supporting herself through this work. But by 2022, she had moved back in with her parents, though she continued to accept occasional requests to meet fans or clients for photo shoots or video sessions in exchange for payment. Her family, it seems, knew little or nothing about this aspect of her life. To them, she was simply their daughter, independent and private, someone who kept parts of herself closed off, but who they trusted to take care of herself, Hiroyuki. Sunanpei's story paints a different picture of how someone can appear completely ordinary on the surface, while harboring darker tendencies beneath. Born in 1989, Hiroyuki had grown up with advantages that many lack. His parents had money, enough that he could pursue his interests without the constant pressure of financial insecurity. He spent time living abroad, learning English, developing skills that would serve him well in his career. He was intelligent, capable, someone who seemed destined for success by conventional measures. After returning to Japan, he secured a position at a major company, and his fluency in English quickly earned him promotions. His career was ascending. Everything looked promising. During this period, Hiroyuki reconnected with a woman he had gone to school with years earlier. They hadn't been close back then, but when they met again as adults, something clicked. They began dating, fell into the rhythms of a relationship, and eventually married. In September 2016, they purchased a house together in the Ibaraki district, settling into what appeared from the outside to be a happy marriage. The house was situated in a somewhat isolated area, with neighbors but plenty of space between properties. A forest nearby that gave the place a feeling of seclusion. When neighbors passed by, they sometimes saw Hiroyuki and his wife sitting outside together, laughing, looking for all the world like a couple in love. Which is why it came as such a shock to everyone who knew them when, just months after moving into that house, they divorced. The marriage fell apart quickly and completely. Both moved away from the house, though it remained in Hiroyuki's name. He would return every month or two to maintain the property, to keep the garden from becoming overgrown, but he no longer lived there. Rumors circulated through the neighborhood about what had caused the split. Some whispered that Hiroyuki had been arrested, or at least detained by police. Twice in early 2017, the charges, according to these rumors, involved sexual harassment of other women and assault on a police officer. There are some news reports that mention these incidents, though details remain scarce. The assumption among neighbors was that these arrests had driven his wife to leave him. After the divorce, Hiroyuki spent increasing amounts of time on social media. It was in 2021, while scrolling through profiles and photos, that he came across Irina's account. Something about her caught his interest, drew him in. By this time, Irina had moved back to her parents' home, but she was still occasionally accepting requests to meet with people she connected with online. Fans who would pay her to do photo shoots or create custom content. Hiroyuki began messaging her. They talked online, built a rapport of sorts, and eventually he proposed they meet for a photo session. They exchanged messages working out the details, what kind of content would be created, what the compensation would be, where and when they would meet. Everything was arranged, negotiated, agreed upon. And on June 5, 2022, security cameras captured Irina getting into Hiroyuki's car near a train station in Ibaraki. It was the last confirmed sighting of her alive. The police who knocked on Hiroyuki's door already knew about the car, about the surveillance footage. When he admitted that he knew Irina and had met with her, it seemed to confirm what they suspected. But Hiroyuki's claim that everything had been consensual, that the explicit videos on his phone were the result of an agreement between two adults engaging in a business transaction, complicated the investigation. The officers found themselves asking a logical question. Even if all of that were true, even if Irina had agreed to everything captured in those videos, why had she disappeared afterward? If everything had been consensual, if this had simply been a business arrangement that concluded normally, where was she now? Why hadn't she contacted her family? Why had her phone gone silent? Hiroyuki maintained that he had dropped Irina off at a store after their session, that they hadn't spoken again after that day, and that he had no idea where she had gone or what had happened to her. The police continued their investigation, organizing search efforts around Hiroyuki's property, particularly in the forested area near his house. They combed through the woods, looking for any sign of Irina, any indication of what might have become of her. Days passed with no discoveries. The searches yielded nothing until June 18, 2022. On that day, someone was walking along a trail through the forest in Ibaraki Prefecture when they noticed a powerful smell, the kind that immediately signals that something is very wrong. When the person looked up, trying to find the source of the odor, they saw something that would haunt them forever. There, suspended and tied to a tree, was a completely nude body in an advanced state of decomposition. The person called the police immediately, and when investigators arrived at the scene, they found that the body had been there for approximately 2 weeks, exposed to the elements, to insects, to the natural process of decay. At first, they didn't immediately connect this discovery to Irina. Police deal with multiple cases simultaneously, and though she was missing, this wasn't their first assumption. But as they processed the scene and began piecing together the evidence, the connections became unavoidable. The location was barely more than a kilometer from Hiroyuki's house, from the place where Irina had last been seen alive. When they were finally able to confirm the identity through available evidence, their worst fears were realized. The body was Irina Arino. During the initial examination at the scene, investigators couldn't identify any obvious external injuries. There were no stab wounds, no bullet holes, no signs of blunt force trauma that would immediately indicate how she had died. But when the body was transported for a proper autopsy, the medical examiner made a crucial discovery. There was a fracture in the hyoid bone, the small bone in the throat. This type of injury is typically associated with one specific cause: strangulation. Someone had choked Irina with enough force to break bone, to cut off her air supply, to end her life. Hiroyuki was arrested, first on suspicion of concealing a corpse, and then as a suspect in her murder. The theory that emerged from the investigation was this: Hiroyuki and Irina had indeed arranged to meet, had agreed to film the content together, but at some point during their encounter, During the acts they were recording, Hiroyuki had choked Arina with such force that she died. Whether this was intentional or accidental remains unclear. What seems likely is that he panicked afterward, realizing what he had done or what had happened, and disposed of her body in the forest, hoping perhaps that it would never be found, or that if it was, it couldn't be traced back to him. These, of course, are theories based on the available evidence. As of the time this script is being written, the investigation appears to still be ongoing. There have been reports circulating online that Hiroyuki was convicted and sentenced to 15 years in prison for Arina's murder. But when searching through reliable Japanese news sources for confirmation, no official announcement of a conviction could be found. The case may still be making its way through the judicial system, or there may be details that haven't been made public. The truth, it seems, is still being determined in courtrooms and through official channels that operate slowly and carefully. What is clear is that Arina's death sparked significant discussion in Japan about the safety of women working in the adult entertainment industry, particularly those who operate independently. Japan has a large and established adult content industry, but women who work independently, who sell content and arrange meetings without the protection of agents or production companies, often find themselves in vulnerable positions. They meet strangers in private locations, trusting that business arrangements will be honored, that boundaries will be respected, that they will be safe. Arina's case became a stark reminder of how dangerous this work can be, how the veneer of professional arrangement can mask real threats, how quickly a business meeting can turn into something fatal. There's a tragic irony in how modern technology both enabled and documented this story. Social media connected Hiroyuki and Arina, allowed them to negotiate their meeting across digital platforms. But it was also technology that captured Arina getting into his car, that preserved the evidence of what happened in that basement, that ultimately helped investigators piece together the timeline of her final hours. We live in an age where we can connect with strangers across the world with a few taps on a screen, where we can arrange meetings with people we've never met in person based on nothing more than messages and profile pictures. It's a world of unprecedented access and opportunity, but also of unprecedented risk. Arina's family had waited 3 days before going to the police, trapped in that awful space between worry and action, not wanting to overreact, not wanting to believe that anything could truly be wrong. It's a hesitation that's understandable, even rational given the circumstances. But those 3 days were time that could never be recovered. Hours when evidence was being lost, when trails were going cold, when whatever chance there might have been to find her alive was slipping away. It's a reminder that there are no easy answers to that opening question. How long would you wait before calling the police? Every situation is different, every person's circumstance is unique. But when someone you love disappears, when the silence stretches on hour after hour with no explanation, perhaps the answer is, not long at all. The forest where Arina's body was found has returned to its quiet routine. Hikers still walk those trails, probably unaware of what was discovered there on that June day. Life continues as it always does, flowing around tragedy like water around stone. But for Arina's family, for the people who loved her, time has divided itself into before and after. Before that June morning when she walked out the door. After the police arrived with news no parent should ever have to hear. We'll likely never know exactly what happened in that basement. What Arina was thinking in her final moments, whether she felt afraid or betrayed, or if the end came too quickly for fear to register. We don't know if Hiroyuki intended to kill her or if her death was an accident during their encounter. A miscalculation of force that had irreversible consequences. These details may emerge during a trial, or they may remain forever locked in the mind of the one person who knows the full truth. What we do know is that a young woman who was simply trying to make her way in the world, who made choices about how to support herself that others might judge, but that were hers to make, met someone through the same digital networks millions of people use every day, and that meeting cost her everything. Her story serves as more than just a mystery to be solved or a case to be closed. It's a window into the hidden vulnerabilities of modern life. The way danger can be packaged in familiar forms, the risks that exist in the spaces between our digital and physical lives. It asks us to think about the people we connect with online, about the assumptions we make when we agree to meet someone we only know through screens and messages. It reminds us that behind every missing person poster, every cold case, every unexplained disappearance, there are families waiting for answers that may never come, sitting by phones that may never ring, holding on to hope that grows thinner with each passing day. The investigation into Arina Arno's death continues, moving through whatever official channels it must, seeking whatever justice can be found for a life cut short. Meanwhile, Her story has joined the countless others that make up the hidden history of our time. The mysteries that unfold not in distant, exotic locations, but in ordinary houses on quiet streets, in forests where people hike on weekends, in the mundane spaces where horror intrudes on everyday life. These are the stories that remind us how thin the membrane is between safety and danger, between the life we're living and the life that could end in a moment we never see coming. As we step back from this particular shadow in the digital age, we're left with questions that have no satisfying answers. We're left with the knowledge that Irina walked out her door one June morning and never came home, that she trusted in an arrangement that betrayed her, that she became another name in the long, sad list of people who disappeared into the hands of someone they thought they could trust. Her family still carries the weight of those 3 days they waited before calling the police, still wonders if things might have been different if they had acted sooner, though logic says there was likely nothing they could have done. The guilt of the survivor, the weight of what-ifs, these are burdens that never fully lift. In the end, Irina's story is a reminder to pay attention to the small warning signs, to trust the instincts that tell us something is wrong, to understand that the person behind the screen, behind the friendly messages and professional arrangements, might be someone entirely different from who they claim to be. It's a reminder that independence and privacy, valuable as they are, can also isolate us from the people who might protect us, who might notice when we're in danger, who might save us if only they knew we needed saving. And it's a reminder that some mysteries once solved don't bring the comfort we hope for. Sometimes the truth is just another kind of darkness, one we have to learn to carry. If this story has left you unsettled, if it's awakened your curiosity about the hidden mysteries that unfold across this vast and enigmatic continent, know that there are countless more waiting to be uncovered. Each one is a thread in the larger tapestry of human experience, a glimpse into the moments when ordinary life intersects with the extraordinary, the tragic, the inexplicable. Subscribe to this channel and join us as we continue exploring the unseen corners of Asia. The stories that don't make international headlines, but that deserve to be heard, remembered, and understood. In every shadow there is a story. In every silence there are voices waiting to be heard. And in every mystery there is a truth that needs to be brought into the light.